Begin Self-Publishing, episode number 1. Self-publishing is easy.
Interested in self-publishing but don't know where to start? Want to get your book onto Amazon? Want to hold your paperback book in your hands? Learn how on the Begin Self-Publishing podcast with your host, Tim Lewis.
There are people who will hear my statement that self-publishing is easy and brand me as a heretic. They will say, it's a fantastic amount of work to self-publish a book. It's really hard, it's really difficult. The reason why I say self-publishing is easy is because I'm defining it differently to many people. If you look at the overarching capability of writing a book, then that is indeed difficult. To actually sit and write a book of any length takes a considerable amount of willpower and effort. And anybody who's ever done it who says it's easy is probably lying, or has hired somebody from some obscure third world nation to do it for them, or is just completely mad. However, in my mind, I would not define writing a book as being a self-publishing activity. Additionally, people would say that self-publishing is difficult because of all the marketing required to sell a book. But again, I would not consider this part of a self-publishing activity. While marketing is part and parcel of book selling, if you want to make book selling a commercial concern, this is an issue whether you are traditionally published by a large publishing company or whether you are self-published. I know many people will claim that the big publishers will do all the marketing for you, but sadly, if you ever actually talk to any traditionally published authors, you'll discover that in the main, this is not the case, unless you're already some major celebrity, in which case you should probably be self-publishing just because you'll make more money out of it than traditionally publishing. This podcast is going to focus purely on the self-publishing side of things. We may from time to time consider issues to do with marketing or to do with writing craft or the actual writing of books. But I do feel there has been a real lack of focus on the actual pure self-publishing tasks. How to get your book onto a store like Amazon, both as an electronic copy and as a paperback book. There are limitations to self-publishing. You do have to do an awful lot of the work yourself. But on the other hand, that work can, in many cases, just be the case of finding the right professionals or people to actually perform the task for you. From a personal perspective, I've self-published 3 science fiction novellas as ebooks and 1 young adult fantasy book as both an ebook and a paperback book. While self-publishing is not just a complete piece of cake as an activity, it is surprisingly straightforward compared to all the self-publishing is difficult claims you might hear. The writing of the book side of things and the marketing side of things are things that you would need to do however you produced a book. So I think it's unfair to say that those difficult activities are specific to self-publishing. With the right guidance and using the right resources, a person can self-publish their book to as good or better degree of quality than they would get from a traditional publisher. And the returns are significantly greater. For paper books, there's a case for saying that if your book is mainly going to sell paper, then whether you go a traditionally published route or whether you self-publish, the financial difference is not as great as perhaps would be with ebooks. But ebooks, which are those books that you can read on a Kindle or even a phone or an iPad, basically almost any electronic device you can read an ebook on. That includes your computer. For many years I was under the assumption, like many people, that to read Amazon Kindle ebook, you needed a Kindle device. This is completely not true. You can read a Kindle book on virtually any smartphone. There is a Kindle app you can download for free from the Kindle store. There's also a free Kindle app that you can download on both PCs and Macs to read ebooks from the Amazon store. There's also a surprising amount of free books available, though they're not quite as many as there used to be. This is how I first got introduced to ebooks myself. When I used to work as a regular commuter, taking the London Underground every day to Liverpool Street, I had a 25-minute spell standing up wedged on a crowded tube train. I used to attempt to read papers and do various other things, or play games on my phone, but it was actually quite difficult. Then I discovered the Kindle app. I started to download and read various ebooks, finding an awful lot of very cheap, independently published and self-published books to read every day, mainly in the self-help business areas. I also went through quite a few of the classic English literature books like Dracula and Frankenstein, Wuthering Heights, those kind of books, a lot of which were, at the time, free on Kindle. So I started this journey as a consumer rather than a producer of ebooks. I did know that people were self-publishing books, but I kind of assumed there wasn't any money in it, or there wasn't any hope of doing anything with self-publishing. Though I still wanted to actually publish some of the books and things that I'd been thinking about for years, but either never finished or never had the confidence to send anywhere. After my wife died in 2011, I decided to read even more books. I almost became like an indie junkie when it came to reading ebooks. I searched out new and exciting independent self-published books, partly because they were cheaper and also because I liked the pick and mix feel that you got with them at the time. You never really knew if you were going to get somebody who was just cut and pasting random items or somebody who was actually writing a great book. And there were some real gems I discovered. I knew that I no longer wanted to stick with my fairly routine IT job that I'd been doing for 15 years. So after a couple of years of drifting and wondering what to do in my life, I gave my notice in at work. I wasn't thinking, I'll be an entrepreneur or I'll be a novelist or I'll be a publisher or anything like that. My original idea was just to do IT contract work, which is probably equally as dull as what I previously did, but was far more lucrative. However, during this notice period, I read a book called Write, Publish, Repeat by 3 indie authors who run the self-publishing podcast: Sean Platt, David Wright, and Johnny B. Truant. There has been some claims that Johnny B. Truant may not be using his genuine name. This changed my thinking about independent publishing, especially as it regards to fiction writing. These guys, using their mantra of writing a book and then writing another book and then writing another book, together with some fairly advanced marketing techniques, these guys have managed to niche out for themselves a regular, reasonable income from writing. As I wasn't under any particular financial pressure, I decided, what the hell, I'll give it a go. The other thing that they added to my arsenal, apart from the confidence that there might actually be a possibility of making some money from independent publishing, was the fact that they described their writing technique, which was to write as fast as possible the first draft, not worrying about errors or other issues, and then going back and revising it later. This made so much difference to me. I actually was able to finish books, admittedly not quite as long a books as I would have liked, but I did manage to finish books and because I'm a fast typer anyway, I finish them fairly quickly. So in 2014, I self-published the Time Shock trilogy. They've not been particular international bestsellers, but I have made a reasonable amount of money from them. Not enough to write home about or swing from the chandeliers proclaiming anything, but a reasonable income. I wouldn't have given up my job for that purely as a subsistence wage. But for 3 20,000 word novellas, they did fairly well, and they still bring in a very small income even to this day. To me, self-publishing is a tool that everybody should consider. While the costs are greater than if you were traditionally published, the actual rewards are far greater. One of the dirty secrets in publishing is that most of the money is in the electronic books. You only have to think about the obvious fact that a paperback book requires somebody to print it, to store it in a warehouse, to ship it to a final bookstore, or even to Amazon. There's an awful lot of cost in a paperback. For an ebook, it's possibly a few pence cost for actually delivering and storage costs. An ebook is just an electronic collection of pages which then get sent off to a device where somebody can view it. It's very similar in format to a website. The main self-publishing platforms, Amazon's Kindle service, Apple's iBooks store service, Kobo with Kobo Writing Life, and Barnes & Noble's Nook service generally provide to a self-published author about 65 to 70% of the royalties, depending on various factors about where it's sold in the world and how expensive the book is. For a traditionally published deal, you would be unlikely to get more than 20% for ebooks. Again, depending on the publisher. Some smaller presses may pay more, and particular deals with people may pay more. But that 50% difference in royalty costs for a product which has no real cost, you do the maths. So you've got to pay for the editing, cover design, and other items, and any marketing requires yourself. But usually with marketing, apart from to the bookstores, the author ends up doing a lot of that themselves anyway. This is the other fundamental change that both ebooks and also the introduction of Amazon has caused to the publishing industry. Previously, there was a very nice and long-established pattern where the publishers had relationships with the book distributors, and then those book distributors had relationships with the actual booksellers. This is quite a different relationship than the one where you have Amazon, who are really just an online retailer. Their entire ethos is designed on the customer, i.e. the reader. So they sell what the reader wants. The other great innovation over the last 15 years is called print on demand. This is the service I used to self-publish my Magpies and Magic book this year as a paperback. There's an old myth that self-published authors end up with stacks and stacks of books in their garage full of books. This no longer needs to be the case due to print on demand. When somebody orders my Magpies and Magic book as a paperback, Amazon sends a signal off to a printing press somewhere in the country where that person has ordered the book, and that printing press will print off one copy of that book. Printing press technology has got to the fact where this is not as cheap as a normal print run, is at least competitive. For a £5.99 paperback book, I receive £1 in royalties. This is still pretty good, really, and more than you would get from a traditional publisher. The advice in terms of self-publishing versus traditional publishing for paperbacks is much more of an even fight than for ebooks. The issue self-publishers face is to get into bookstores. But even with this, there are self-publishers who have managed to get their books into several major large bookseller chains. Because ultimately, those booksellers do want to sell books. They're not going to turn down good books. There have been quite a few issues, though, where rather naive independent authors have gone wandering into bookstores, pestering staff who may be just working there at the counter, trying to get them to stock their books, which unfortunately has caused quite a few of the people in the bookselling industry to be quite anti-independent authors, which, if you think about it, can be quite understandable. However, from an actual financial and business point of view, for many independent authors, getting their books into a bookstore is at best an irrelevance. Huge number of books are sold via the Amazon website. And in fact, many independent authors just look at paperbacks as almost a novelty marketing toy rather than as a proper income source. They do provide a great way that you can sign a paperback where you can't really sign an ebook, whatever anybody says. I know people have been trying to use software to sign ebooks. But in that particular area, paperbacks win hands down. It is also possible to independently publish audiobooks. There is a service called ACX, which I believe is also owned by Amazon, where you can independently release audiobooks onto Audible and various other listening services like iTunes. The royalties on audiobooks are considerably lower, between 40 and 20%, depending on whether you do a royalty share with a narrator. They used to be a lot higher, and many people see that if Amazon manages to increase its share of the ebook market to the size it has with the audiobook market, where in effect it is the only show in town, that self-published royalties will go down. However, there is still considerable competition in the ebook market, and I would never recommend, like many other people do, to go exclusively with Amazon for ebooks. But I'll talk about that in a later show. In the next episode, I will take you through how to get your book as an ebook onto the Amazon store. There are two main parts to this. One is creating an ebook from your Word or Scrivener or other file, and actually the process of uploading your ebook onto Amazon. Neither of these are particularly complicated.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please stop by iTunes and rate and leave a review. This helps make the show more visible. For free resources, show notes, and other helpful content, join the community at beginselfpublishing.com.